Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson and community organizer and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. Thank you. A quick shout out for folks that are listening in or watching this. We are sharing we're asking folks to be in contact with us through our webnode, blog, or through any of the Medium platforms that you have been on with us. Andy, do you want to say why?
Yeah, just if you've experienced adverse effects from taking the COVID-19 vaccine and are open to talking about it in a future episode on What's Left, let us know.
On with our discussion. So we've invited our frequent guest, John Klyczek. Welcome, John. John Klyczek is the author of School World Order, the Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education by Trine Books. And he is a contributor to New Politics, the Center for Research on Globalization, Op-Ed News, the Intrepid Report, and the Dissident Voice. Welcome back.
And now you're on Unlimited Hangout.
Oh, that's right. I am. That's right. Yeah. Maybe we should update that next time. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah.
All right.
That's important because that's Whitney went.
Yeah, I've never had so many responses to an article in my entire life. So, usually I write them, maybe a couple of people. So, no, it's big time. I'm very happy about that. Very honored to publish with her or write for her. And, hopefully more to come. Yep.
So we'll be discussing today's topic, which is a new world order. And this is a conversation we've been meaning to have with you, John. Andy, maybe you want to expand on why we thought this topic would be important for us today.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is a kind of a continuation of a theme we've been carrying on What's Left about the right and the left working together when we share a common enemy, and that's certainly the case right now. And there is a left opposition, a Marxist opposition to the COVID repression that's going on. But in all actuality, the Marxists have not been good on this question. Many of the people who have been good on the question, frankly, come more from the right and have a different framework for understanding what's happening. They certainly think there's, a small group doing something, just like Marxists would talk about, like the capitalist class. We call them a smaller group. But I didn't really know how to talk about it, but Jake is a person who I feel like knows some of the viewpoints that where that comes from. When we just kind of called it the New World Order kind of framework. And I really wanted a chance for Jake to talk about that in front of us, in front of Eduardo and Kenny, and we could ask him some questions just to understand the theory better. And I feel like if we can understand the theory coming from another side, then we can actually really engage in common struggle and be honest with each other about where we agree and where we disagree. But we can't do that if we don't really know what each other believes. So the goal here, and I really appreciate Jake, and he and I have had long conversations about a lot of different things. I really appreciate him taking the time to do this. I'm sure there's things he's going to say that don't cover things that other people believe about it, but this is our starting point today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and I think it's an important conversation to have, just to not to necessarily make any specific claims or points about anything. Like, I'll cover a lot of stuff, but you can at any point chime in. I can tell you what I think about it, but really I'm just going to cover like different angles that or different pillars of what people would consider the New World Order. And I think it's important to have this dialogue because everything is very polarized, and particularly polarized between people that have way more in common than they should be fighting about. So I hope being more than just walking through what does the tapestry of this New World Order look like. I'm hoping we can model conversations that other people can engage in on their own shows or in their own everyday life. So yeah.
Yeah, I actually wanted to start with a question for Kenny and Eduardo that I didn't warn you about. And if you wouldn't mind, you guys say what you think New World Order means to you when you hear that.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Can you? I think for me, what comes up for me is what I had years back. I was living in the UK, and I remember my friend, his name, and maybe he'll see this. My friend Duncan, who lives in the Forest of Dean, he talked about once how there is this idea of governments coming together to form maybe a totalitarian government together, and this notion of independent states and wouldn't exist because eventually they would just merge into several bigger states, and then they'll have this new world order where this totalitarian state would then be dominant and wouldn't necessarily have what we have today. And there are hints of that, as he was saying, if we look back at how even if we want to go way back, from tribal communities suddenly becoming merged into more established societies, and then colonization happening, and then slowly becoming more divided states, and then slowly becoming governments that, even though they may be considered different governments, there's still somehow overreach or governance from one government onto the other, such as Latin America being used as the backyard for the USA. And that's not necessarily, the Latin America hasn't always been a threat, except for the very smaller countries that have tried to, like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and at one time, some of the countries like Argentina, right? And that's where they put other people like Pinochet, right? But it's mostly been seen as the backyard of the USA, whereas other countries that are more emerging, like China and Russia and the USA, these are very stronger countries that are fighting to compete to take over of the entirety of the globalized government. I think that's my understanding. That's what I was introduced to. And the economics of that would be changed, and we have seen sort of one currency, like in Europe, right, where they had merged into one currency, the euro, right, and the USA dollar seems to be the most accepted currency globally, and slowly that's becoming more and more. It's the economics, it's society, it's government, and overtaking. That's why the Middle East is important as well, right? It's who they're going to side with, or these allyships everywhere around the world are important. I think that's my introduction to this.
Well, for me, I'd be lying if I told you that I knew much about this. I honestly more came into contact with this even title, right? The New World Order more recently. It does evoke, a framework of understanding the different aspects of society that govern our lives. And so I am curious more than anything to learn about how these things might fit into how I understand the world through my framework, which is a socialist Marxist framework. And so, yeah, my suspicion is that there are things there that, that are similar parallels. And I also think that my notion of the New World Order framework is associated more with the right than the left. So, yeah, I mean, I really don't know much more than that. I do also vaguely understand that this is kind of a fringe, quote unquote, like idea. And that doesn't really get a lot of play. But it does attempt to answer big questions, right, of how things are connected. And so I'm curious to be here.
How much did you know about it, Andy? Or have you always been how long have you known about this
I
theory?
mean, I've heard New World Order for at least, been thinking about it or heard it for the last 20 years when I got into politics. And yeah, I think the way y'all described it is pretty much the same way I looked at it. And now I'm just curious to really start to understand it more deeply as a framework for understanding how the world is organized and where the world is headed.
And if I may, John, how did you get, or how long have you been looking into this?
So I probably heard the term tossed around when I was in high school with some of the people I hung out with. But it didn't have a political bone in my body at the time. It was interesting stuff. But when I really started to research it would have been in college. So I guess about 15-ish years ago, something like that. And the main way that I came into it was actually through learning about eugenics through some of these conspiracy theory websites. I had some friends that are sharing me stuff, and I'm at the college at the time, and I'm getting close to my senior year in college, and there was it was actually an Alex Jones documentary. It was called Endgame. My friend sent me, and it was he talked. It was this global eugenics plan in there. And I'm like, come on, I never even heard the word eugenics, and so just that alone was crazy especially because in college you get a lot of social justice, racial justice, equity type rhetoric. And I'm like, how did nobody talk about this if this is real? Like, this is the absolutely most racist thing I've ever heard of in my life. Hitler's race hygiene. And then, basically in that movie, he talked about how, the United States basically actually started it and funded it, Rockefeller Foundation, all that. And, I was like, well, if this is true, then I'll be able to find it in the library. And I found all those old eugenics documents there. And so that was kind of the first kind of rabbit hole. But it was also what struck me was, well, how did I get all the way through college and never heard of something that's just like a historical fact? Like, and I just kept digging from there, and we'll go down some of those other paths as we talk about this.
And one question I was hoping to start off with was maybe the who would you describe as the set of people who kind of would ascribe to some of these ideas? We kind of put them to the right. How would you describe the politically characterize the people who kind of go by this New World Order kind of idea?
Okay, yeah. So you're right. I mean, like, especially as of now, right, in the current parlance, yeah, typically if you use that phrase, people are going to think right wing or alt right or something like that. But my publisher, he's an old hippie, right? Cannabis enthusiast, right? I don't do the left right thing. I mean, like, I guess people would say I do have a libertarian streak, and I guess I do. And but he's kind of the same way. But I would, if you talk to him, and he wasn't talking New World Order stuff, you'd probably think left of center, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, before I go down the groups that are currently associated with it, like, especially during the 60s and 70s, that this concept is way older than that. And, there was left-wing people that talked about it. When people talked about Big Brother, they talked about New World Order. And, but today, I would say, I guess you could probably break it down. Like, people will come into it approaching it from two main blocks. I would say, like, one is economic or political economic, and then the other one has a religious streak to it sometimes. And so you have a kind of a range on both of those blocks. So in the economic sector, I guess you have libertarian types, all the way to like your anarcho-capitalists, right? Your ANCAPs. And then you have like traditional conservatives, like constitutionalists, paleo conservatives is a term they use, or classical liberal, like in connection to Thomas Jefferson, which is not libertarian or anarcho-capitalist, right? They emphasize more getting back to the Constitution and upholding the Constitution. So you got those are three economic perspectives. Then you have, from a religious perspective, it tends to be a lot of people that are either Christian in orientation or what I would call New Age, and that's kind of a vague term, but like alternative forms of spirituality, usually more esoteric, maybe getting back to indigenous forms of spirituality. So those would be the different groups. And then there's and I guess what straddles both sides of that would be there's a lot of people that will emphasize like this Zionist bloc or the Vatican bloc, or and I guess I could just mention now, right? Each one of these groups it tends to, if you want to overgeneralize, tends to like focus on one element of this New World Order, whether it be the Vatican or the Zionists or the globalists or the occult or whatever. But I think that's a pretty good overview of the different blocks. Like if I missed anything that could be subcategorized, we'll probably touch on it. But that would be a range. But I would also say that there's people like me that I don't subscribe to any of those. I'm aware of them. I'm aware that how they have different perspectives. But if you go to, let's say it this way, if you go on New World Order media and you kind of look at it stylistically, like the themes of the articles and the rhetoric used, they will, what I mean? You could kind of shade them into one or more of those categories, I would say.
Well, maybe go ahead and start from what you heard us say about New World Order and start from there.
Yeah, so you got a good overview there. I this is this little brain map I made to help me organize my thoughts here. And so you basically mentioned two of the three main nodes over here, which are like the structure of the New World Order. So that would be a world economy, a one world government, and a one world religion. So centralized global control of all your trade, all your finance, all of your governance, and then basically control of thought, control of the mind. I mean, it could be spiritual, but ultimately it's control of your ethical stance, your moral stance, and your psychological stance is another way to conceive of it if you don't come at it from a religious or a spiritual perspective. So all of this sort of like central control of all those resources, right? And then these three over here, intelligence and black ops, Malthusian eugenics and transhumanism, and then cult and secret societies, are just sort of the mechanisms or the methods by which this is accomplished, by which this structure is put in place. So as you mentioned, you kind of conceived of it as this sort of a veneer of national governments and separate nation states, but really there is this superstructure, this overarching global political economic system that kind of controls stuff, and that's pretty accurate because you have all those lines on that map that separate the countries. But if you look at stuff like, I'll just open up global economy here, and you have everything from your global finance, international trade organizations, multinational corporations, roundtable non-governmental organizations, and tax-exempt foundations. So all of these various institutions operate in ways that are able to cross those lines on the map, and they have strong influence on the domestic policies of all those nation states. And so we can open some of those up and look at this. What are some of the specific institutions under those various categories? But that's kind of how, what you're thinking. That's kind of how it works, right? You've got these supranational organizations that have a lot of influence on various national policies.
Yeah, well, for me, what I want to know this is it safe for me to say that this is a theory, or how would I refer to this as? I'm not trying to mischaracterize, or I don't.
I think theory's fine. I think that's fine. Yeah. Theory, framework, idea. I mean,
I'll use framework. And I was wondering this when we talk about this New World Order framework. How do you see governments being able to merge or becoming centralized, as you just said, when there is so much infighting and a lot of differences in the way that the world economy or the world even colonization should happen, or the way that governments are functioning currently? It seems to be a lot of differences and conflict.
So I think there's actually two answers to that question, which are going to sound like different answers, but actually I think work together in a dialectic. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up world government here, and just so you can see, I have roundtable NGOs under both, but I'll just give you one example of how we basically are already under de facto global government. All right, and you see here we've got the World Health Organization and the United Nations. I can go into UNESCO and stuff like that later. And I just wrote for Unlimited Hangout a long history of how UNESCO has influenced the national educational systems of various Eastern, Western European countries. And so you can check that out on Unlimited Hangout. But like right now, I mean, we're basically like every country, even countries that, don't get along in terms of political economics all the time, that, there's some friction there. We're all under World Health Organization directives. We're all doing the vaccine thing. We're all, I said from the day one, when they called the emergency powers, right, or the state of emergency in the country. Why did we do that? We did it shortly after the World Health Organization announced it. So, I mean, that's one example of how, right, we've got our own thing going here, right? We got our own elections and all that, but really we're under the orders of the World Health Organization, right? So that's one way that sort of there is that global superstructure inside the nation states. But then the other part is, like what you rightly point out, is that, well, you can see stuff like this, like the U.S.-China beef, right? And the U.S.-Soviet beef, okay? George Orwell, I'm pointing like you can see the 1984 back there. But his whole idea was that there would be an endless war. You'd have three blocks, three super states. So there was Oceania, and that was basically what Carol Quigley calls the Anglo-American establishment, and that's the merger through finance of Western Europe and the United States, and you can add Australia and Canada to that. Okay, and then you had Eurasia, which is basically the Russian Soviet bloc, and then you had East Asia, which is basically the Chinese Soviet bloc, and then all the other parts of Africa and Latin America were places where they fought. Okay, and so in his paradigm, it was an endless war, and they would just switch who was fighting who from one time to another. And when they did it, they would change the propaganda and erase the history. There's actually this scene in there. It sounds absurd, but the way things go nowadays, I could actually almost see it happening in real life. But they're in the middle of this he's up on a podium during one of these speeches trying to rile everybody up. And he's like talking about how we're at war with Eurasia. And then somebody comes up and gives him a piece of paper in the middle of his speech. And apparently they just switch who they're fighting. So in the middle of his speech, he changed it to East Asia. And everybody freaks out and they turn around because when they fight against East Asia, they make an alliance with the other guy. So then they're friends with Eurasia. And so they look at all these posters on the walls of East Asia was their buddies, and they go, East Asia must have sent spies and put these posters up, and they start tearing it down, and everybody starts basically rioting and stuff. So it's a long story to say that centralized global governance operates through things like the World Health Organization, United Nations, while at the same time, right, you still have these other conflicts, and largely it's for the sake of either distracting your public or for creating conflicts where you can extract resources from Africa, Latin America, what they call the third world or whatever.
Let's stay with world government for a second. I feel like I'm talking about like Alex Trebek at the Jeopardy. Kenny, you want to say? I have a question there, but Kenny, do you have a question as it relates to what we're looking at right here?
So yeah, I mean, not every nation has an equal say, right? There are three powers you're mentioning, in this framework. So kind of reminds me of, colonizers and the satellite states, right? So the smaller players don't really have a say. So there is some sort of still wrestling for positioning, or is there collaboration among these three states or three superpowers? That's what I'm curious about.
So I'm just going to go with Orwell's paradigm. There's literally a part in there where he wonders if the beefs that they're having is like when they get bombs from either Eurasia or East Asia. It's a really brief moment. He says, "I wonder if it's actually just Oceania bombing itself, and saying that it's the other side." So it's not clear, but it appears that like the oligarchs of those blocks are actually in cahoots, right? More than they beef, right? If there's anybody that's not part of that paradigm, it's the so-called third world countries, right? And they just are subject to. They're basically a fighting ground where these other blocks either compete for resources or cause these conflicts that scare their populations into submitting to the military state. And an example of that kind, I mean, as you mentioned, I guess to go back to like the actual, talking about historical paradigm here. There's a good documentary called Life in Debt, DEBT debt, and it's about the World Bank and how the World Bank shortly after, when the British said, "Oh, we're decolonizing and we're going to let go of all these colonies," right at that time, the World Bank pops up like, "Hey, want some loans to, be independent and build up your infrastructure and stuff like that?" And these were these predatory loans, very similar to the stuff that we went through before our crash in 2008. But they would go out and they would give you these big loans, and they were short term, and you had to pay it back in a certain amount of time, and if you didn't pay it back, came with strings attached, right? And so they'd have to give up stuff like your infrastructure, lower the trade barriers. And what I learned from Lois Weiner was that they actually were able to put mandates on ed tech at the time, and were able to force a lot of the stuff that's happening to us right now. I mean, they didn't have the sophisticated technology, but they could make them. That was where they practiced a lot of this, like IBM, Microsoft, and a lot of this ed tech in the 90s. But if you look at that documentary, it kind of focuses on the example of Jamaica and the prime minister. I want to say Michael Mann. I think I'm saying his name right. I always want to say Manley, and then I don't know if it's Mann or Manley, but it's one or the other. He was the prime minister. And one of the things he points out is that, when the United Nations was formed, this is right after World War II. So decolonization didn't happen yet. So, yes, other countries, the so-called third world countries were able to be joined later, but it was not set up for that. And so, when it would come time for him to go to the World Bank and say, "Hey," try to negotiate these loans in a way that was actually fair to them, they didn't have the power, and the voting power was largely tips the scales in favor of those Western colonial powers that set up the United Nations. So that's a long answer to say that that I think those big blocks, your Soviet bloc, your Western capitalist bloc, your those two blocks. I was going to divide Russia and Asia, but if you just put those two big blocks together, all the other countries, right, Africa and Latin America, tend to be a lot of those countries tend to be not don't have the same weight in how they participate in like the UN and stuff like that.
And Jake, I'm going to stay with world government. I have a question here, and so I think the analogies that I think Marxists would make is we recognize these global bodies, but the analogy we would probably use for something like the UN is a poker table where the big powers, China, United States, Germany, France, they show up with their big wad of cash. They show up with their loaded dice. They show up, and then the other countries either align themselves with them or they show up on their own. Like maybe Brazil shows up at the table and they got barely nothing to show for it, right? And they're all showing up to see who can collect. Let's have a friendly game of poker, right? But everyone's got their gun behind their back, right? Particularly the big powers, and some of them have 3 guns, and some of them have 1 gun, and they all hope that they can come away, like particularly the big powers, hope they can come away from that table with all the money, right? But if they can't, and particularly if they lose too much money, they're prepared to take their gun out and start shooting, right? But they would like to avoid that if at all possible, and they kind of think they can avoid it. But Marxists would say they can't avoid it. It's going to eventually break out into global war. World War I was an example of that, World War II, and World War III, which is coming. So maybe assess that way of looking at it compared. I think that's maybe a Marxist model for it. How would you compare your own model to something like that? Because we would say that these things are going to end, that the fundamental relationships are competitive nationally versus how it's put forward in New World Order.
Hey, yeah, that's a good one to talk about here, because so from a New World Order framework, the perspective would be that the world wars were not really just these organic breakouts based on a competition that just escalated. They would say that global financiers, and this in the New World Order paradigm, there's an important distinction between financial corporations and other companies, right? Other forms of industry, and that global finance basically fomented both World War I and World War II in order to do away with old political structures, old paradigms, old whether they be religious or spiritual or moral or ethical, but also the political economic paradigm, and to bring about. So after World War I, you have the League of Nations, right, and that doesn't go very far. But then after World War II, right, and they would say that World War II happened very shortly after World War I because they didn't get their global governance bodies. So through this conflict, funding both sides of the war, that they basically fomented a crisis where basically it wouldn't matter who won, because whoever won, they funded that side, so they're going to get the profits. Whoever lost, you're going to have to pay reparations. And then you had stuff like in Europe, the Dawes Plan and the Marshall Plan, where basically the United States came over and they managed the finances of a lot of those countries and told them what they had to do to rebuild, almost like that World Bank model. So that's how you can actually fund both sides. Like how could you do that? That's how you would do it. That's how it could work out in your favor. And then there's historical examples of that happening. So we'll just do World War II. World War II, you have Union Banking Corporation, and Prescott Bush was part of that. Order Skull and Bones. So was Knight Woolly, Order Skull and Bones, and either E. Roland Harriman or Averill. I think it's E. Roland Harriman. It's one of the Harrimans. All 3 Skull and Bones. And they funded the Nazi regime through Fritz Thyssen, who ran, if you've ever been, we've still got Thyssen elevators at one of the colleges where I teach. It's got the Thyssen logo on it. Thyssen. I'm pretty sure it's Thyssen. That's how I pronounce it. And through that alliance, basically they funneled money into the Nazi regime. Then you had alliances between Hitler and Ford, right? And then there's the IG Farben complex, the IG Farben, Monsanto, which the recent Monsanto Bayer merger was actually a reunion. They used to be part of a company called Mobe, and it was part of the IG Farben cartel. IG Farben was the Nazi chemical cartel, right? And then in World War I, there's a couple books here. Sutton wrote extensively about it. Also, he's got 3 volumes on Western technology and Soviet economic development, where he shows that, that's the other one, Skull and Bones again. Through Guarantee Trust, they also funded, the Guarantee Trust had dealings with the Nazis as well, but there's also a connection either between Guarantee Trust or another bank and one of the first Russian banks called Ruscom Bank. And this was, that when the Russian Revolution happened, right? Like Marxists wanted Marx's idea was that it would come out of an industrialized nation, and Russia really wasn't there yet, right? Like a lot of places didn't even have roads and stuff. So it was, what Anthony Sutton wrote, the Order of America's Secret Establishment. It's his treatise on Skull and Bones. When he was at the Hoover Institute, he was doing research on Soviet or Western technology and Soviet economic development, and he was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why are we, if we're really fighting these people, like, why are we sending them this money? Why are we building their railroads? Like, they wouldn't even have been able to become the formidable adversary for the Cold War had we not funded them. And then I won't go all the way through it, but my friend Charlotte Iserby wrote the forward to my book. Her parents were Skull and Bones. He gave Sutton the address books, and when he saw, right, that he had these bankers, he looked at the names, and he already knew these names, and he knew who they funded, and he was like, aha, like this is like old, this is getting closer to the real mechanism that has shaped history. So those are a handful of examples of how I guess New World Order people would think differently about the world wars and the previous, and they would agree that there's a third one in the plan, but they would say that that's going to be orchestrated by these what they call the globalists, these oligarchs at the World Economic Forum, and I can show you some of these other NGOs later, but and that they hope to ride the tiger and profit from it in the end, and hope that they can not burn up in the aftermath.
So tell us about world economy.
All right, so with world economy, I guess the easiest way to think about it, or the way to ground it in non-conspiratorial sounding stuff, will be to look at these international trade organizations and global finance. Now, I got multinational corporations down here. I don't think we need to really get into that too much. I mean, I just broke it down into big oil, energy, big pharma, big tech, mainstream media, military industrial complex, and Wall Street. So if we can zoom in, I guess, on an aspect of Wall Street, which would be global finance. We already sort of talked a little bit about one way that the world economy works, and that is right through global finance of the World Bank, and how right through this one supranational organization they can basically influence the economic policies, the trade policies, the trade barriers of various countries around the globe, and then you have all the different member nations putting their money into it to fund it, right? If you're, as we mentioned, some of those folks that come to that poker table with the big bag, right? Then you have the International Monetary Fund, and they function very similarly to the World Bank. And actually, they're part of the same system. It was set up by John Maynard Keynes, the Bretton Woods system, and again, it's right after World War II. Then you have the Bank of International Settlements. And this was a bank that was caught laundering money. I want to say, was it Nazi money during World War II? See, I'm hoping I'm accurate on it. But they've been, I believe it's in Switzerland, and yeah, if I'm correct, right, they've been there, been involved in laundering some of that money. I think, am I right that this is where they wanted to put that those Pfizer, that money that they wanted to get from those contracts where where Pfizer was saying they wanted some of the Latin American countries to put up money. Is that it?
I believe so.
Yeah, it was a bank. I want to say it was a bank, but this is another example of right how that bank operates. I don't know a whole lot more about it other than I remember it in my research on collusion with Nazi Germany that it popped up. And then other people might put in here like Rothschild central banks, but this is really, I would say, more prior to the World War II mainly. I don't know how much influence the Rothschild family still has in the Bank of England and the central banks of, I believe, Italy, France, I want to say maybe Germany as well. And then through connections to American banks, right? When we made our own country over here, there was debates about whether or not we should have a central bank. That's what the War of 1812 became about. And then we didn't have one for a minute, and then it came back. And J.P. Morgan had a banking enterprise in Europe called Morgan Grenfell, and that was associated with Rothschild banks through I want to say through Peabody or another bank, and then that's why in Brave New World, Aldous Huxley has all of his characters have these combination names. So he has like Bernard Marx, that's George Bernard Shaw, and Marx. You got Darwin Bonaparte. I don't need to break that down. And then he's got Morgana Rothschild, and that's J.P. Morgan and Rothschild. And so that's basically, you also had other Rothschild associated bankers like the Warburgs and Jacob Schiff that were started the Federal Reserve System over here. And then the Federal Reserve System itself, as you all noted, like because the dollar is basically the global reserve currency, you could consider that another instrument of global finance. I didn't put that up here as far as Federal Reserve, right? And then you also have the Vatican Bank. I don't know a lot about it, but I know it's got a lot of money. I know that, and so I can't say more than that. But people would put that in the tapestry. They would put that all together. And then should I look at another one of these nodes on this?
Well, just before you do, though, I'm curious if cryptocurrency is a threat to any of these institutions.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know a lot about crypto. I've thought about it. Now, I thought about ways that it could be. I thought about ways that it could ultimately build a digital infrastructure for them, right? So maybe it's a double-edged sword. But I can say one thing I could definitely say is, both Trump and Biden recently said they don't like, they really came out vocally against Bitcoin. So I think maybe a way to approach this or to think about it might be to look at, is there a way to have a truly decentralized and encrypted blockchain, or is that just a pipe dream, right? I think that's the crux of the issue. Like if you could have it be decentralized and you can have it be encrypted, I think it could definitely be something that would be a problem for them. But if there's a way that it's easily swallowed up into this larger geospatial intelligence surveillance capitalist grid, then one of the reasons I never invested in it, back in the day when it was pennies, and I'm listening to all the crazy people on the internet talking about it, and I'm thinking like, this thing probably will be big. But what ultimately made me not put any money was like, yeah, am I going to be just building the infrastructure that, kind of how we do with the internet? Yeah. We all carried our phones around, and we were just, we're just doing our thing, and then next thing you know, right, they're kicking you off platforms, they kick you off PayPal, they censor you. So I don't know, but potentially, I do know. I'll just say one more thing that a lot of these institutions, financial institutions, are looking into their own cryptocurrencies, their own digital currencies. Now, again, right,
China recently came out with their currency, the digital currency. I think China didn't they?
Oh yeah, I wrote about that in a piece on the implications of blockchain as a distributed ledger, not necessarily as a wallet, because you can put more than just money on this stuff, right? It's just a ledger that records smart contracts, so you can put other data on it. But yeah, it was, and somehow it was going to be connected to their social credit system too. So, yeah, so I mean, I guess that's not a clear answer, but I think there's a way it could go either way.
But you were saying that these institutions are looking into their own digital currencies.
Yeah, I think the IMF, I think at one point was looking into it. I remember they were looking at this thing called a Bancor, and then they were looking at ways to have a global currency. One was called a Bancor, BANCOR. Another one was different, what they call special drawing rights. And I can't explain the exotic algorithms that it has to do with what country you are, how much your currency's worth, how much do you got in the bank, and then how much you can take out based on that. It was a weird thing. But I want to say that at some point that they were thinking about, instead of those two options, using some kind of a digital or cryptocurrency.
So is this all you want to say right now about this element? Because I have a question. I want to see if Kenny has a question. Or do you want to say more about the world economy getting off the global finance node? Is there anything you want to add in addition to it before I ask my question? Or Kenny, do you have a question about this?
No, it was just a comment on, you were talking about cryptocurrency, and it just so happens that El Salvador became one of the smallest countries in the world, definitely in Latin America, became the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender in their economy. And so, I think that, they're trying to be modern. That oligarch, that leader of that country, he's trying to modernize the country. And so, yeah, it's just coming. It's going to be part of our world. And so I'm just curious as to maybe if you have any comments on that, Jake, as to how that fits into this, like a small country taking that initiative to modernize their economy, quote unquote.
Well, I don't know a lot about, like, can you tell me more about, like, here's one litmus test, like, how are they handling the lockdown stuff? Are they, like, worse than us, better than us, like, as far as how strict they are? Like, what would you say?
They have they don't have the technology that, we have, and they've definitely tried to be strict. I know that for, they clamp down on immigration through pressure and funding from the United States, and so they definitely are building a surveillance state with Israeli technology and things like that. I'm not so sure as to how they're really implementing the lockdown yet, but it is notable for me that these some people are calling this person his name is Nayib Bukele, the first modern dictator. Because he has a lot of popular support, but he has very futuristic ideas for the country.
And he's using not just blockchain crypto; he's using Bitcoin specifically.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not a good sign. I would say that, like, to go just back to like New World Order paradigm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a good sign, because I mean, like, I would like for it to be something positive. We've got so few things that we can, that we can leverage in our favor. I was hoping, but in the New World Order paradigm, a global currency. I should say. I'm glad you mentioned this, because a global currency, a one world currency, is part of the paradigm. And this is also where, by the way, a lot of people will come in from a religious, particularly like an apocalyptic Christian perspective, with the whole mark of the beast and the book of Revelations. I mean, I believe there's other religions that have similar end times or apocalyptic scenarios where, right, this just centralized thing. But that, so that's where people would also come into that. But definitely, regardless of the perspective, a one world currency is definitely part of it. And the best way, to use that analogy of the mark of the beast, right? It's this thing, it's on your hand or your forehead. You can't buy or sell without it. So, you know, it's not just that you have a one world currency, but that it's hooked up to this like surveillance grid or this surveillance state where like there's no way to barter outside of it. There's no way to get around it, right? And so so those two things go together. So then, right, what would be if you wanted to do that, it would probably have to be digital, right? It would probably have to be digital. So, you know, a lot of people will probably think when they see stuff like that, you know, yeah, that's moving in that direction, I guess.
I guess the question I'd like to get to stay on this systemic kind of view is, again, use Marxism as a compare and contrast, right? Like finance capital is certainly talked about in Marx and in Matt Marx's assessment of capital. It's where capital accumulates so that it actually can be used and for productive capital to put things in motion. But fundamentally, the system that Marx describes when he's talking about a global economy is one that says an interrelationship between productive capital and industrial capital, really, and finance capital, separated into nations because they compete, but that what governs it is the fact that they need to profit. That you need to profit. So the governing force behind production is not a decision, rather it's the need to make profits. So that a car maker says, I don't make cars, I make profits. Another toothpaste maker says, I don't make toothpaste, I make profits. That would be a Marxist paradigm for understanding that everyone is really making one thing in terms of the capitalist production model, is they're making profits. And that's how it understands production. And it says that profit making occurs in an anarchy of the market, right? Like you don't necessarily know if you're going to make the profit, but of course you're going to load the dice and, you know, in state actor ways and other monopolistic ways. But at the end of the day, it's an anarchic situation. Does the New World Order see a world that is produced on the basis of profit? Does it accept that notion of at least capitalism existing like that way? Or do they see New World Order as deforming capitalism, and that capitalism itself is kind of almost like this free system that if New World Order wasn't screwing it up, it could work?
That's a good question. So I think it is sort of like so I would say that especially if we're gonna keep the, you know, if we're gonna look at it from people that are right of center, considered right of center, which is the common parlance, I would say that all those groups that I laid out, the different groups, I would say they all have an amenable position towards capitalism to a degree, not entirely. They all have critiques of capitalism, right? Even the libertarians, who you could think of as like some like, you know, radical capitalists, you know, is one way to think of them, right? Would critique things like crony capitalism and corporatism and things like that. You know, but then you have even like, you know, just like traditional conservatives that would not, you know, want a libertarian economy, but would still say that, you know, that the real, like a real free market, not, you know, the free trade that's part of these other international trade organizations that we'll look at in a minute. That is in some level an essential element of a free society, regardless of what the public's role is in regulating it, or, you know, providing public services or redistributing. Like there should be this element of free exchange between your labor, your production, and whoever you choose to trade with, right? You know, they would look at something like the difference between, like, you know, my dad was basically, you could call him a capitalist in the sense that he was a carpenter who was his own, he had his own business, but he was doing business as DBA. He wasn't a corporation. He wasn't an S Corp. He wasn't a C Corp. He wasn't an LLC, you know, and he had family members that were like, you should do that. And he like, you know, you're not going to make money unless you have a company and you out. And he was like, I like to build it, man. I like to put it on the wall. I like to see what I created, stuff like that. And so, you know, that would, I guess that's my example of the type of, everybody would at least like in that end of the spectrum would like some form of capitalism, some element of capitalism that looks like that. The other part of your question is the relationship between finance and industry. or manufacturing. And so from a New World Order perspective, not everybody will probably use this term, but I'm going to use it because I think it's a good way to distinguish the difference between the profit incentives of like a large industrial manufacturing company versus a bank or a financial institution, which has more than it has profit in mind. It has the accumulation or the co-optation of assets, meaning like, so those companies, however big they might be, a lot of the times are actually in debt to these banks, and they're reliant on it. And a lot of times, just like in the example I gave of the World Bank, right? The banks are giving out the loans so they can basically take over part of your company and don't have to worry about you can put a lot of the risk onto the company. And then, if that company goes up, well, they still got it. They can sell it to somebody else that wants to try to run it, and the element there would be more a system of usury than a system of profit. And a system of usury is one that tries to get something out of nothing. I guess certain degrees of profit, especially if you're particularly, uneven-handed in how you do business, could be similar. But, you're excising a ridiculous amount of interest, which has absolutely no correlation to any labor output, any contract as far as production or labor. So that's the difference. And those financial institutions, right? Not only do they want to buy up and own up those companies, but in the example of the World Bank, or they want to buy up, like countries, right? Like your public infrastructure and your private businesses. And so that would be the difference, I'd say. So let's take a look at another integral part of this global finance, which would be international trade organizations. So so these are various collectives, I guess, where these multinational companies and their the governments where they domestically operate get together to agree upon whether they be tariff regulations or other trade agreements internationally, right? So like, what are we going to trade in dollars? Are we going to, how much are you going to charge for X goods X or goods Z or goods Y, right? And so just to kind of give a little overview here, some of these might not fall perfectly into international trade organizations, but the goal of making the nodes was to make, enough categories where it wasn't just endless data points. So certainly we could say the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade and Tariffs, or GATT, is one of these. NAFTA, I should have put the acronyms here. Everybody knows the acronyms better. Yeah. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that's the OECD. You could probably put that one under global finance as well, because well, you could probably do that. I don't know that like I said, I don't know that I categorize these perfectly, but then you got your WTO, World Trade Organization, and the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. All of these, right? This is your agreements between Western Europe or America and Asia, basically, more or less. This is basically our agreements with Canada and Mexico, and then your World Trade Organization is basically just global. I put the World Economic Forum in here. That might sit under like an NGO or a roundtable as well, like a think tank is another way to think of it. Because there's not actually like trade agreements that are brokered here, but a lot of the ideas about how they want to actually broker these trade deals at NAFTA, at the TPP, right? They really get together and kind of in their little gentlewoman's club here, and think tank those, kind of spitball those ideas. I would say the EU, which was first known as the European Common Market, and that comes shortly thereafter World War II, connections to Bilderberg Group there. But that's basically why you even have one currency that you can use in all the different countries of Europe. So, I guess you could put that in an international trade organization. Maybe you can consider it an element of international finance as well, right? So, and I'm not being super concise here, but I want to take this moment to point out, right, like some of these institutions kind of operate in a couple different spheres, right? And so, but this is a good way to, lay them in different categories, I guess.
Did you want to comment on how the World Economic Forum is related to the Great Reset very quickly, or is that going not too far off?
Well, here, we could just open it up, right? So the World Economic Forum is running the Great Reset. Let's look at the members they have. So I didn't put any specific companies in, but here's the multinational corporation category, but here they are. Right, here's a bunch of your multinational companies. Most of these, if not all of them, are U.S. based. This is Aurelio Pecci, and Aurelio Pecci gave a speech here on overpopulation, zero growth stuff, and he's related to, or he co-founded the Club of Rome with Alexander King. Alexander King was part of, I think he was he was the director of science policy or something like that at the OECD, right? And then we're back into our international trade organization. So you can see there's a nice little connection there. Now going back to the World Economic Forum with the Great Reset, I should have put it in here, but I spent a long time on this. I had to walk away at one point, but I could have put a little note here. Maybe I'll do it right now. I'll just make it. And I'll go. Oh, I don't have my keyboard. Sorry, I can't do it. It's over there. The World Health Organization, right? What World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization are pushing the same narrative, right? And they often, are like, we're collaborating and stuff like that. They were also buddy with Johns Hopkins University at Event 201. They are also buddy with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation there. So yeah, so I mean, all this COVID stuff that we're dealing with, all the lockdown stuff, right? This is another example of how the policies that were being implemented here domestically is really coming from these global institutions that, as I just illustrated, are all in bed together. They all commingle together.
And looks like a majority of tech companies.
Oh yeah, if I would have had time, I would have added all your pharmaceutical companies there too. If you go on there, I think it's their partners page. Just go wef.org, go to the partners page. It's alphabetized. I mean, it's, each letter has got a huge section. But if you can think of a big company, it's probably in there.
And
I know that Andy.
Go ahead.
I know Andy doesn't want to go too far in this area, but I see 23andMe. Can you just quickly talk about how it's related to, because I think a lot of people are on this, the ancestry sort of trend, and I see 23andMe. Can you just touch base on it just for our folks that are interested in things that directly affect them? I mean, I know all of these things directly affect people, but this is one of those things that I think is a cultural phenomenon, which I think is related to the bigger framework.
Yeah. So let's go. I'm going to click on the Google. So that's real quick. So Google, I'm going to say this: Google either funds 23andMe or owns part of it, or it's something like that. There's a financial or a corporate connection between the two. And we'll put a link up or something. So 23andMe is one of these companies that's basically looking into your genomics, and basically they say they're going to find your ancestors and your family tree and all that stuff. But what they also do is they don't just look for your ancestry, right? They can do. You send them your DNA, and when there's a little box that you check, and it says something like, "Can we use it for research?" Right, and so when you give them that, they'll use it to see like, they put it in this big pool of other sequences to try to correlate which sequences have everything from like, one of them was IQ, and when we talk eugenics, I can wrap on that more. But like allergies, other health conditions, and then actually, I don't know if it was specifically 23andMe, but One of them is called Gene Plaza, I believe. That's another company that does similar stuff, and they might partner with 23andMe. But in my book, it's in the same chapter where I'm looking at all these companies. They share that stuff with. They can share that stuff with a criminal justice department. So the Golden State Killer, right, was just, they found out who that guy was based on not his DNA, not even DNA that he was like someone immediately related to him. It was like 5 steps removed or something like that. And then they narrowed it down to like location, age, and they figured out who it was. But the Google influence there is, I imagine, either other than financing, I'm pretty sure that they handle some of the data analysis as far as how they scan the correlations between the gene sets.
All right. Well, that was it. Thank you for that tangent.
That while you noted that under the New World Order there's these 6 nodes, that the real thing about these nodes is they all interconnect. Like elements of them get you to the other parts, and it forms sort of a web, as I understand it.
Yeah, and I know some people are just going to be listening to this, and then some people for whatever reason might be not differently abled, might not be able to see. But for those of us that are looking, just so if you are looking, the way that these nodes are supposed to work is if it's from top to bottom, it's either like a chronological relationship or a hierarchical relationship. And then if it's like one of those nodes that goes left to right, as in from World Economic Forum to Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, or in Google to 23andMe, and that, maybe that should be hierarchical. I didn't bother to double check the precision on that, but this is to say it's a jump. So it's like there's a connection, like either they cooperate or they collaborate, or in some way they work together, but it's not like one owns one or one came historically as a precedent or anything like that. Just visually, so that it might help you think about what you're looking at if you are looking at this map.
Yeah, if we can go back to just the center, or
which one you want to go to next, Kenny?
World religions, to finish this section right here, and just to maybe remind me, Jake, so you have on the right world economy, world government, world religion. What is the difference between this section and the one on the other column?
So on the left, so on the right, that's basically the infrastructure, right? Like the actual institutions, the public faces of the New World Order. On the left side, what you have are the methods or the mechanisms, or they might call it the hidden hand, the non-public face of how they actually carry it out. Now, obviously, if all these companies are getting together at the World Trade Organization, that's one place where get together with your little think tank buddies and you talk about stuff and make agreements. But a lot of times, some of those conversations, some of those agreements they've already had those conversations in other more private, clandestine arenas, right? And those would be in through some of the intelligence agencies and some of the occult or secret societies.
Okay. So yeah, I think we should definitely go for world religion just to finish this.
Okay, so the best way to understand the world religion component is to understand it in terms of the world economy and the world government. So in order to establish a world economy and a world government, you'd have to get rid of all of the classical world religions, because you could set up a one world legal system or a one world government, and also you could set up a one world trade system or one world trade regulations, in other words, a one world economy. But if you have a bunch of classical traditional religions that have different beliefs about what is right and wrong, you're necessarily going to have opposition from those religious perspectives. Right? There's going to be people that have different spiritual, moral, or ethical beliefs about things that are wrong with the one world economic regulations or the one world government legal system. So there's two ways to get rid of those classical world religions. So one is to destroy all of the classical world religions or just get rid of them somehow. The other is to blur them together or blend them together in a way that they are absorbed into the ethics of the world economy and the world government system. Okay, so let's take a look at the world religion block, and let's talk about those two different strategies for either getting those classical world religions out of the way or basically blurring them together into this milquetoast thing that is basically just absorbed into the ethics of the world government, world religion, or world government and world economy. Okay, so under world religion, I have 4 nodes. I have monotheistic apocalypticism, I have monotheistic ecumenism, and then I also have atheism and humanism as one node, and then Luciferianism and Satanism as another node. Okay, so the monotheistic apocalypticism is the strategy in which we get all of the classical world religions to fight, in particular the Abrahamic religions, that being Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Okay, and so the idea here is that you get them into a global religious war that would either culminate in World War III or be somehow contingent upon World War III or connected to a World War III scenario. And then as a result of that beef, as a result of that war, as a result of that fight, you have the United Nations and other world governance bodies come in and play a referee and say, okay, enough of all these classical traditional religions, because all y'all do is fight, and so we need to just get rid of those religious principles, and we need to basically establish like a non-religion that is atheistic or humanistic. And in a sense, the world religion that would replace the traditions of the classical world religions would be one of scientism, and their religious sacrament would basically be technology. And then later on, we can talk about how that relates to transhumanism. You can kind of get a sense of how the scenario could play out if you just take a look at the crises in the Middle East, which have been going on at least since the establishment of the State of Israel, and that being the conflict between the State of Israel and the Islamic world. And then obviously various Christian sects take sides in that, sometimes supporting the State of Israel, others sometimes supporting the Islamic State. There's a lot of Christians in Palestine, so depending on which denomination people might associate with, there's Christians on either side of that turmoil. And obviously, right, recently we've seen that those crises have escalated to a new level. The strategy in which you blur all of the religions together in a way that makes them compatible with or absorbed into the ethics of the world government and the world economy would be something called monotheistic ecumenism. So ecumenism is a movement usually associated with different Christian denominations in which they take a position not that the Bible and Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, but that basically all religions have some sort of truth that can all be sort of blended together if each of those religions were to put aside particular dogmas. Now, a good example of this would be some of the Catholic Church's most recent meetings in which they believe the Pope went to a ziggurat somewhere in the Mesopotamian world, and they were holding prayer vigils with a bunch of other world religions, all of them basically celebrating an ecumenical faith where they would all pray to their own gods or their own deities through their own faith. Now, the end result of such an ecumenical merger sort of lands in the same place as a humanistic religion, but other people could see it as sort of a new agey thing, and that new agey thing could have parallels or could dovetail with Luciferian or satanic spiritual ideologies. So what I mean by that is if you ask each classical religion to get rid of its traditional dogmas in order to make them all compatible with each other, the only common denominator that can really be found after you strip away the particular traditions and doctrines is either going to be something of like a humanism that uses those religious doctrines not as revelations of the metaphysical spiritual truth, but just as archetypal stories that represent the human condition or the psyche. You can kind of think of it almost maybe like a Jungian thing where Carl Jung would say something like all of the mythologies of the classical religions basically just represent narrative ways by which we express psychological elements of the human condition. And so in that way, again, you're making all of those world religions amenable to the ethics of the world government and the world economy. Now, another way that you could approach the ecumenical strategy where you blend all of the world religions together, you could also interpret that as creating or evolving a new system of pantheism. And pantheism basically says that God is in everything, like that God is the matter and energy of the universe itself. But the common denominator between both the pantheistic approach to ecumenism and also the atheistic or humanistic approach to ecumenism is that human beings become God, either by understanding the secrets of the universe and mastering the secrets of the universe through an esoteric understanding of nature, again, primarily through science and technology, although there could be other esoteric practices involved in the pantheistic strategy. Or in the atheistic humanistic approach, although there would be no explicit notion that humans are gods or that humanity has crowned itself as the god of the world, by default, right? Since there is no higher metaphysical principle, there is no transcendent principle, that by default we act like gods, because in that strategy, morality and ethics again is going to be about how we master nature and the human condition through, again, science and technology. Right? So either approach, whether it be to get rid of the world religions or to blur them all together, the idea here is that human beings become their own gods, and the oligarchs of the world economy and the world government basically take on the role of a priest class who are the gatekeepers for a new faith or belief in scientism through the sacrament, again, of technology. Now, the Luciferian and Satanic interpretation of that new world government can be understood in terms of the idea that if you look at the book of Genesis, the argument in the Garden of Eden before Adam and Eve eat the apple is that Eve is she's out in the garden, and the serpent says something like, hey, you should eat this apple, which is the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And Eve says, well, no, God says if we eat that, we'll die. And the serpent says, which is Lucifer or Satan, he says, no. He's just telling you that because he knows that when you eat that fruit, you'll be like him, meaning you'll be your own God. So that is biblically the promise of Satan, Lucifer. And so you could call it atheistic, humanistic, or Luciferian satanic, and sort of mean pretty much the same thing in the sense that human beings are crowning themselves as God through the power of science and technology, or scientism and technology, as a means of mastering God's creation.
Am I right?
If I may, can I just quickly insert myself here? I was raised a Jehovah's Witness for 18 years of my life, and this is exactly when I heard New World Order, I was thinking that this wouldn't match up, because New World Order, as I had said earlier in the very beginning of this episode, whereas New World Order, as we're talking about it before I delved into this area here, that we're delving into the religious aspect, is what I heard from my friend back in 2015 in the UK about world governments trying to create a totalitarian government. But at that time, I remember thinking New World Order sounds very familiar because as a Jehovah's Witness, there is this buy-in to this idea that they're expecting World War III, or they're expecting something like the North King and the South King, whatever, like this new kingdom, this how do you say potencia? Potency, like how do you say this?
Like superpower.
Superpower. Thank you, gracias. Thank you. Superpower. This superpower government to come through to show itself, and to and because there is this like Babylon or this statue figure of different superpowers governments that have shown over the time to, like Rome was one of them, and over time to have eventually fulfilled prophecies from the Bible that will show eventually that we're going to enter this phase. That's why COVID and this whole I don't know if this, I'm not, I'll be careful around how I say this. The pandemic fits perfectly for the Jehovah's Witness ideology, because it shows famine, diseases, all of these things are signs of the end of the times. That's the Jehovah's Witness thought. And so anyhow, what you just mentioned here, I didn't delve into this part of your map prior to this, and now that I'm looking at this, I could see how this is serves the prophecies of some world religions, such as Jehovah's Witness, which is a branch of Christianity. I'll stop there.
Actually, one of my really, really good friends is JW, and we talk theology like every week, you know, and it's fun conversation. So I'm familiar. I get to with that statue talking about that's in the prophecy of Daniel. I won't go too deep into that. That's probably too particular for our discussion today. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And okay, so now let me break down some of the particulars of these different nodes and show you some of the different paths or some of the different pillars. Okay, so in the monotheistic apocalypticism, so I use the term apocalypticism here because all of these different Abrahamic religions have an end time scenario in which there will be Armageddon, or a final conflict that will result in the day of judgment. Now, other religions have end time scenarios as well, and they could also fit into this dialectic. But if we think of the crises in the Middle East as a geopolitical scenario where we could actually see something of this type of scenario actually breaking out, this is a good way to capture this scenario. Okay, and so I should also add here that there are some people who believe that this end times World War III religious war scenario will establish a world religion by means of either a Vatican takeover or a Zionist takeover, or even a takeover by an Islamic caliphate, meaning one of these religious blocks will come out on top of the world war, and then whoever comes out on top, that block will establish their brand of a world religion based on their religious precepts. So should I pause there?
Yeah, I have a question. Then, so at first I was looking at it and being like, okay, people who are opposed to New World Order would out of this monotheistic apocalypticism would have said that the Catholic Church and the Vatican is running part of this operation, that they're the engine behind the finance capital and behind the way the global government is being formed. And in that understanding, you're opposing the actions of the Vatican. Then you're speaking of another group of people who essentially are saying, no, man, I'm all in. I can't wait till the World War III. So some of those people you're describing are New World Order people who are for the New World Order forming and see it as an expression of, their religion is going to come to pass when the New World Order does its thing and the world is destroyed out of global war. So is that right? Like some people, I'm a little confused there because some of the folks you're talking about, I could see opposing the New World Order formed out of these Zionist, forces coming in, or the Catholic Church coming in. And now I'm hearing another set of people who might believe this, who would actually be like, yeah, let's get there.
Now, I believe that all those perspectives basically just feed into this World War III dialectic. And also I feel that those perspectives are the least plausible because any one of those narrowly defined religious paradigms will be far less compatible with the cosmopolitan, technocratic, transhumanist ethic of the world economy and the world government infrastructure that we have described so far. So what seems most plausible is a scenario in which all of these religions are moved out of the picture, or in which they are synthesized or amalgamated into a new ethic that can be plugged into technocracy and transhumanism. And also you can see that within this dialectic of Middle Eastern conflicts between Christian geopolitics, Zionist geopolitics, and Islamic geopolitics, there are in fact demonstrable geopolitical alliances across these three religious paradigms. In particular, you can see that the Zionist agenda of the State of Israel is supported by American evangelical Christians and branches of Christian Zionism, and then both the State of Israel and the United States, within their Judeo-Christian alliance, both of those nation states partner with Saudi Arabia, which is an Islamic country. And one thing that all three of those countries have in common, despite the differences in their domestic religious alliances, is the fact that they are all heavily invested in smart cities, which are building the Internet of Things that will be plugged into the transhumanist biotechnologies in the technocratic world government, world economy.
Yeah, you just mentioned, the end goal of the new world order. So that, maybe this will be answered later, but I just want to throw this question in there. So is there central planning? Is this like a, like you said, a Hegelian situation? And if there is central planning, who's driving this central planning? And, because we've talked earlier about, these superpowers being in cahoots with each other. So do they, they literally sit in a room? You've mentioned these other, secret organizations. So I just want to throw this question in there, like whether it's central planning or it's just this interplay of actions that lead to a new world order and outcome.
If there is a central planning, it would be either in your intelligence agencies and or your secret societies. And one day when we get there, you'll see that they pretty much overlap. Okay. Now, if we're talking about in terms of like from the religious paradigm, what is the central plan? In my opinion, I would say it's the Luciferian one. Okay, so now let's look at the strategy of monotheistic ecumenism, where we blur all of these religions together and we strip away their traditional doctrines until all that's left is either some sort of an atheistic, humanistic ethic or a pantheist religion, in which both cases, right, human beings are their own gods either way, and that the new religion is basically scientism with the sacrament of technology. Okay, so to show you how the strategy of ecumenism actually, again, is compatible with the ethics of the world government and the world economy, let me just show you a recent Vatican conference, and you can see that there was representatives of Pfizer, okay, and also Johns Hopkins University right here. We've got representative from Moderna. We got Mark Benioff from Salesforce. He's Bilderberg Group. We've got Chelsea Clinton from the Clinton Foundation. We're here. Look, we've got Deepak Chopra. So there's an ecumenical alliance with Eastern religions or Eastern philosophical religious traditions. Got a professor of genetics from Harvard Medical School. Okay, and then you can see that we've got a gentleman here from something called One Shared World, which I don't know what that is, but it sounds very one world order to me. And then over here, we've got a representative from the Food and Drug Administration, US FDA. There's also members of Microsoft's medical officer and VP of Healthcare Worldwide Commercial Business branch of Microsoft. And then a gentleman from the World Federation of Public Health Associations. Okay, and then I'll show you one more, which is a gentleman who who represents the Islamic branch of ecumenism, and he is a chair, British Board of Scholars and Imams, and a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Okay, and at this conference, basically, if I can paraphrase, the Pope said something to the effect of that the Catholic Church should evolve and move forward into an era where it would play more of a role like a nonprofit foundation or a global social service society. So again, right, you see here you've got this alliance or this merger of various religious affiliations in combination with nonprofit organizations, academia, global health organizations, pharmaceutical companies, and basically they're all working together toward this new world medical society that is also being pushed by the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and the World Health Organization. Just kind of to illustrate how this ecumenism thing actually is amenable to or can be absorbed into the ethics of the world government and the world economy. Okay, and so now let me go back to the map to kind of walk through a couple other approaches or subcategories that fall under this ecumenism. So related to the monotheistic ecumenism, as I mentioned, is the pantheism, where the matter and energy of the universe is itself God, and that humans can become God by mastering the secrets of the universe through science and technology. Now, again, I'm going to show you down here, you'll see Philosophia Perennis, you'll see astrotheology, and then you'll see New Age esotericism. So Philosophia Perennis is just this idea, it basically means the perennial philosophy, and it's this idea that there is a fundamental truth in every form of religion, and that we should strip away all of the veneers of the various doctrines, and if you do that, what is left is the true religion, or the actual truth that just takes different shapes perennially, right? As over the years, as society evolves or as cultures change over time, that the expression of that perennial philosophy takes different forms, which we would see in the different forms of the classical world religions and other lesser known religions. And then you can also see here, if I light it up, that there's a connection between Philosophia Perennis and something called Gnosticism. And then that Gnostic node also connects back over to the New Age esotericism. Okay, so before I explain what Gnosticism is, I'll go ahead and break down what is the New Age esoteric branch and how that feeds into the pantheist model or the ecumenism model. So when I click on New Age esotericism, you'll also see that it is connected again to this other node of astrotheology, so we can get to that in terms of its relationship to the New Age movements. Okay, so when we talk about the New Age movements, the distinction I would make for the New Age is that, you can see this if you ever go to a New Age bookstore, you can see that they have texts on all of these different categories, and a New Ager will sort of combine all of them together. So some of the traditions that they would connect with would be Gnosticism, Egyptology, astrotheology, and theosophy. So theosophy, I think we can talk more about theosophy when we look at the occult and secret societies. One thing I can say here is that theosophy is connected to Luciferianism. So if you look at the history of the Theosophical Society, you can see that the founder was Helena Blavatsky, and Hitler really liked her stuff and her theories. And we'll talk about that more when we go into the secret society stuff. But you'll see that one of her proteges, it was Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey set up something called the Lucifer's Trust, or otherwise known as the Lucius Trust, but it was actually called the Lucifer's Trust at first. And they had a publication called Lucifer. And if I light this up, you'll see they have contracts with the United Nations. So there gets us right back to the world government body, and it shows you how, again, both the different modes of ecumenism can be compatible with Luciferianism and also, right, the infrastructure of world government.
Do you feel like you've discussed enough about Luciferianism? Because you were at the other guy, and there was another pantheism that you were going to compare it to.
Okay, so let's go back to the node on ecumenism, or rather, I'm sorry, the New Age esotericism. Okay, so let me go ahead and just break down Gnosticism a little bit here, which again is tied to theosophy, or they share certain spiritual, mystical, or philosophical tenets, and one of those is their connection to Luciferianism. In particular, there are branches of Gnosticism which believe in an inversion of, again, the garden story that I told you, the Garden of Eden story. So a traditional reading of the Bible would see that, right, God is good and Lucifer and the devil are bad. But certain Gnostic traditions would say that actually the God of the Old Testament is different from the God of the New Testament, and that the God of the Old Testament is actually what's known as, in Neoplatonism, which I have a note up here, as the demiurge or the architect, and that this lesser deity was like a jealous and vindictive deity that actually imprisoned Adam and Eve in the garden, and that it was Lucifer, or the angel of light, or the light bearer, who, by giving Adam and Eve the fruit from the tree of knowledge, enabled them to free themselves from the prison of the garden and to become their own gods. You can see a lot of other connections here to secret societies, Freemasonry in particular, and Kabbalah, but we'll talk about that when we get into that next time. Okay, so let me go back to New Age esotericism again. Last one here, astrotheology. So this one also will take the Bible and it will look at all of the various stories in the Bible as astrological metaphors. So if you've ever heard of the theory of the age of Aquarius, they would say something like, okay, in the Old Testament, there is the age of the bull or Taurus, and that's represented by the golden calf that when Moses comes down from the mountain with the tablets, and they're all worshiping the golden calf idol. That's right. That's supposed to represent Taurus. And when he brings down the law, that ends the age of Taurus. And then as they move into the land of the Canaanites and they go to war with the Canaanites and all the various other tribes out there, they would blow the ram's horn. And so that's supposed to symbolize the age of Aries. And then the next dispensation would be the age of Pisces, which, if you've ever seen, right, the Jesus fish, they say that that's the symbol of Jesus because it actually represents the age of Pisces. And then now we have just recently moved into the age of Aquarius. And maybe you've heard that hippie song back in the 60s or the 70s. I'm not going to remember when it was made, but this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the age of Aquarius. So that's what they're singing about. Okay, so another way to understand astrotheology is maybe you've noticed before that, right? The Greek and Roman gods actually have names which are identical to planets, right? So the god Zeus in Greek mythology is Jupiter in Roman mythology, but it's also a planet, right? The god Ares in Greek mythology is the god Mars in Roman mythology, but it's also a planet, right? And if you take a look at the Vedic astrology, you'll see that the names of certain deities in the Hindu tradition are identical with the names given to the planets in Vedic astrology. So again, in this tradition, the mythologies of the ancient religions are seen as metaphors for understanding astronomy, and through those narratives that help us understand the sky clock, we're able to master nature through things like the agricultural revolution, right? Being able to anticipate the seasons, and then therefore being able to, have, I guess, one of the first, would call it industrial revolution, but proto-industrial revolutions, right? Moving from like a nomadic society to an agrarian society. Now you'll also see here I've got it connected to ancient alien theory, which I won't get too deep into, but you can just take this same concept and then instead of reading the planets and the mythological gods as metaphors, they would say that actually they refer to ancient communication with off-world entities, right? Ancient aliens. If you ever watched the History Channel, there's tons and tons of stuff on that. And people sometimes even use like the story in Genesis of the Nephilim, where the sons of God, which I guess are angels or fallen angels, they came down and breeded with humans and created these giants called the Nephilim. And people use that as one of many theories as to ancient contact with off-world entities, in other words, aliens. I can also add here that in that monotheistic apocalypticism scenario where you have this final conflict, this world war between all the world religions, that some people believe that that's the moment when not the United Nations will come in and play referee, but finally, right, all these UFO disclosures, there will be a final disclosure and the aliens will come down and play referee, and then they'll be our new gods, and they will sit atop the new religion of scientism and technology. And in line with that theory, people would say that that it was the aliens that gave us the knowledge to create technologies, if not some of the technologies themselves.
Those are visions of forces that are looking to institute a new world order, like whether they're alien ones or some ending with a pantheistic kind of like the Force from Star Wars. Like these are visions different people have of the kind of religious order or spiritual order or alien order that will be established once this new world order is set up.
Yeah. That's. I mean, did I make it at least that much clearer as I said that? I guess the only other thing that I would say about that is that, okay, but you can see that the common denominator here in all of these different approaches to what could be branched under the ecumenism, that what they do is they basically blur all of the different religious traditions and their doctrines and dogmas together, and they sort of strip away those doctrines and dogmas to reveal what is left, which is secret knowledge of the secrets of nature, right? So having a mastery or mystical knowledge of the secrets of the matter and energy of the universe, right? And in the contemporary parlance, right, the pinnacle of understanding the secrets of the matter and energy of the universe largely comes through science and technology, although you could add to it maybe some of these other mystical practices, right? So like transcendental meditation, or this neo-shamanistic mysticism through psychedelic usage, or even through some sort of mystical understanding of the sky clock, in other words, astrology. And so then, of course, all of those become amenable or easily absorbed into the scientism and the technocracy of the transhumanist world government, world economic apparatus. Okay, so that's probably a pretty good place to pause for a second.
Yeah, I would just say for both reasons of time and reasons of Wi-Fi, it's worth just saying, okay, we dealt with this. Really, what did you describe that other side as? Is the infrastructure of the New World Order? Isn't that the world economy, world government, world religion? And next week we're going to talk about sort of the mechanism for its institution, for using that infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, this is very eye-opening, or what is that? Because All right, I want to ask John a question. I'll do the summary, because what happens is, for me, is that I can see how this map has helped me see all the institutions are so interconnected in a way that you would almost think, when I was entering this and thinking about what I had said earlier, my friend having Duncan talking to me about this, about the World New Order, I did think it was very improbable or unlikely that all of these institutions, that, well, he didn't explain it the way that this has been mapped out so nicely. And I did think, oh, it can't be, I just don't see it. But this is, for me, been clearly, like Alison does with her maps, and she doesn't have this specific software or whatever site you're using to organize it this way. But what she organizes is, right, are companies and people and money and the way that they are all have worked and partnered together. And this is so much more organized in a way that I clearly see how the dots are, that it's hard, I think, to think that there is any way that, or it's hard to think that there is a way that these things are happening behind the curtains. But this is, for me, been just, yeah, I'm just repeating myself, just been very well organized to know that this is possibly fathomable. I would like to know, of course, in order for me to be able to feel more secure with my thoughts, to know the other half. But I'll just say that. That's it for me. It's just...
Well, again, yeah, this is part one. To try to understand this frame of analysis. I do think it's important to hear the other part and to see how these things get executed from this frame of analysis, because I do have questions about, like, the entire thing as a whole, because as at the moment, as a, from my Marxist point of view, I see similarities in how these institutions are interconnected. What I see a difference in is to the end goal and the mechanism that connects these institutions. Because again, this is not that different than how I understand Marxism. How these people in these different institutions are connected. And again, I'm just hoping to hear the rest to see how much more and how this framework differentiates from Marxism, really. Because at the moment, yeah, there's, I don't dive so much into religion, and but I know that it plays a role, and just like you said, Jake, this like, that's one thing that people have a hard time understanding Marxism. That is not like, it's some, there are mechanisms like the profit system that shape society and that shape these institutions and that come back around. And this, the Marxism, in my view, is an understanding of the whole, not just one part or the other, and how they interact, because they feed on each other. And so far, again, I'm not seeing that much of a difference. And so that's why I'm interested in that second part. Where does intelligence and black ops come into play in this? Secret societies too, because they do exist. The breakfast prayer clubs are shaping politics in Latin America. The evangelical church are. But, and so again, I do think it's important we just continue this conversation.
I found it fascinating that I could see some connections with the Jehovah's Witnesses, but their New World Order and the way that they think about it.
Isn't the publication something like, or is the New World Translation?
Watchtower.
Like that, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
the world, yes.
Watchtower, but isn't the Bible the New World?
The New World Translation, yes.
And do you want to have any summation thoughts based on what you heard from Eduardo and Kenny?
No, I'm glad. I'm just glad to hear that it was at least somewhat easy to follow, or cohesive, or coherent. I mean, I'm trying to jump on a bunch of nodes. A lot of stuff I could tell you, I could document with facts and stuff. Some stuff I'm just telling you what's out there, and I'm perspectives that that I've spent time looking at just to see how people think about stuff, and not necessarily bought into it or not, but I've also been able to look at how those different groups either agree or disagree, and then how it all kind of fits together. So I just, next time, hopefully, right, it'll make even more sense, or it'll more food for thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Kenny said about seeing the other side allows things to be brought together into a sort of web. And then I think, like Kenny also said, which is there's a new set of questions that I think emerge once you see the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you remember I came out of largely a very, very socialist leaning perspective, and after looking at a lot of this stuff, in some ways, when Obama was in, it kind of left a bad taste for things left of center, when all my professors and a lot of my colleagues were thought that was somehow like progressive, socialistic stuff, and then I was like, disillusioned. But in that process of kind of starting to look at more of the libertarian type stuff, and then seeing all the Trumpers basically do the same thing that people did with Obama on the other end of the spectrum, I just largely spent a lot of time just trying to look at the 5 W's: the who, what, where, when, and then the why, but mainly the who, what, where, and when. Let's look at these companies. Let's look at who are they connected to. Oh, this World Economic Forum. Oh, the Council on Foreign Relations. And then just creating a paper trail and documenting that. And then, I don't know, you can call that whatever you want. You can analyze it from whatever perspective you want, but there's definitely connections here that should be paid attention to.
Jake, I appreciate you sharing this. That's what I would say. Like what Kenny and Eduardo said. I think this is a good start, and I'm actually looking forward to hearing the other part and getting into that. And I'm glad we got into the details, a little bit into the weeds, even if we missed some of the nodes. And I actually, as much as that world religion part was like a little bit, different, I actually think that is, it's good to hear and see that stuff, because I come into contact with it. And like you said, Eduardo and I are talking about maybe doing on that episode, given all the UFO stuff, this is going to come back, because there are people talking about this stuff. Like, why is UFO suddenly being talked about? And there are people out there who see these stories related to visions they have of how a new world order is coming to be.
So we'll look forward to part 2, and we'll have John Klyczek once again come onto the show and really give us the breakdown of the other side of the New World Order framework that we just looked into. And thank you so much for that map, because I really do think that really is going to, and for listeners who are able to, and I would encourage and invite them to look at it on YouTube or any of our other platforms. All right, well, that does it for this week's episode. John Klyczek is the author of School World Order, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education by Trine Day Books, and he is a contributor to New Politics, the Center for Research on Globalization, Op-Ed News, the Intrepid Report, and the Dissident Voice. We'll link to all of your work and also to the previous episodes where we had you on as well on your YouTube channel. Thank you, John. What's Left is a weekly political podcast that's channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please share your favorite episode, rate, review, subscribe, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, LBRY, LBRY, Odysee, ODYSEE, YouTube, and Telegram. And if you'd like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Andy Lipson and Kenny Cepeda. Thanks again, John, for being with us again, and see you all next time. Ciao.
You should be, Kenny. I'm glad you came back, because I was about to complain to Jake about YouTube.
Oh, YouTube? Wait, what did you get? Did you get striked again?
No, So here's my complaint. I'm going to put it in this is not going to be in the episode, but I'm going to put it in this episode. We can keep it as a time capsule. I don't like, okay, if I'm teaching somebody about waves or sound, then if they go, oh, well, tell me how you get resonance. And I haven't even started on waves. Like, well, tell me about this. It's like, before we ask questions about digital currency, they don't even understand the system you're describing. Now you're putting a second thing we don't understand on top of the first thing we don't understand. That irritates me. So this is how I'm an old person.
No, you're a dude. I totally, if I'm going to be polished, always general to specific, right? Like general meaning, like you can't talk about the specific thing, especially if you're trying to do a whole tapestry, especially, and that goes for topic sentences. Don't get me on
this generation, this millennial generation, they're so impatient. They want to know all this modern day stuff. They want to know how their iPhones and cell phones work.
Our attention span has been messed up. Don't
worry, you're gonna get a neural link. It's gonna help. You just plug it
in. Oh Jesus!
A student, he made he made it. It was a decent argument. Like I'm not getting a brain implant, but he was like, we put all this information on these disks. Like that's an extension of your memory. So why not just plug it in your head? But I can explain why that's actually not entirely accurate. I think me and you talked about this with Joe Rogan, saying you could communicate better when, of course, you don't always know what you're trying to say to begin with. But anyways, so let's
go to world
religion. Shall I jump in there or?
Right. Yes, you should.